Do you avoid certain situations because you know they'll trigger your anxiety? Or maybe you run headfirst towards your fears, determined to not let them beat you, but still feel just as uncomfortable every single time. So what's the answer? Do we avoid or confront our anxiety triggers? Well, the answer is yes and no to both. What? Hi, I'm Tim Box, mind coach, anxiety specialist, and author of the book Clear Your Head. For more than a decade now, I've been working one-to-one with people to help them get control of their anxiety issues and get their life back. And one of the questions I get asked all the time is, should I be avoiding my anxiety triggers or confronting them? My answer is always the same. I just don't care. Well, of course I do care, but what I mean is that as with many things in life, what we do is a lot less important than what we learn from it. So of course it's very natural to feel like avoiding our triggers is very probably the smartest move. If you know certain situations cause anxiety, it makes perfect sense to just not put yourself in that situation. After all, that sounds much more comfortable. Back in the day when I was socially anxious, I did a heck of a lot of not going out and seeing people. To be fair, I still do a lot of that, but now it's mainly because my idea of a good time is sitting at home on the sofa with both my wife and a cup of tea by my side. But it's not uncommon for my clients to tell me that they've reached a point where they're adopting a strategy of avoidance when it comes to managing their anxiety. So they've stopped going to work, or they no longer travel too far from home, or even they're just avoiding a certain location simply because they experienced an episode of high anxiety there in the past. Often this is because we have the idea that we've in some way oversensitized our nervous system. We assume this must be why we're responding in an exaggerated fashion to seemingly innocuous situations, and we need to allow ourselves to heal to the degree where we're no longer prone to those more extreme anxiety responses. We think, if I avoid the things that make me anxious, then in time I'll get better. But unfortunately, it doesn't really work that way. Of course it doesn't. That'd be far too easy. So here's what's really happening when we choose to avoid our triggers. We're just validating the idea that those things are dangerous. We're confirming to our subconscious that we can't cope, that the situation isn't safe, that our mind was right all along when it created a fear response. In our attempts to eradicate those higher levels of anxiety, we just reinforce the ideas that inspire them. What happens then is that our mind, trying to protect us, doubles down on the fear the next time we even think about doing that thing. This is why, even though avoidance feels good in the short term, in the long term, it just keeps us stuck. The other thing that inevitably happens is that where we've taken time out to heal, if we get to the point where we're feeling in a better place, then the moment we decide to re-engage with our perceived trigger situations, we pile a whole load of contrived pressure on ourselves. We basically create a big old pile of anxiety about going back to work or traveling outside of our neighborhood because we've now built it up to be the big challenge we've been working towards. We've turned a trip down the road into the emotional equivalent of ascending Mount Everest. And then when we inevitably feel anxious about scaling those heights, we conclude we just weren't ready. And maybe we can even start to fear that we might never be. And I know what you're thinking, Tim, there must be a better way. Well, yeah, of course there is. It'd be weird if I just left it there, wouldn't it? But before we talk about making things better, we first need to talk about how things could be even worse. So you're probably thinking that if I'm advising against avoidance, that I'm going to suggest a gradual process where you face your fears using repeated and increased levels of exposure to systematically desensitize you to those specific situations and create new, better responses. Well, not exactly. Because confronting your anxiety triggers or doing your exposures, as I hear people talk about all the time online, isn't actually the solution that it's often cracked up to be. When it comes to exposure, we often get told that it's an essential part of recovery, a step that has to be taken if we're ever going to feel better. So let's just dispel that myth right now. You don't have to repeatedly expose yourself to the things that currently scare you to rewire that fear response. I've been helping clients recover from high anxiety for nearly 15 years, and not a single one of them has had to go through any exposure process. And here's the common misunderstanding about exposure. It's not the act of facing the fear that rewires our response. It's what we learn in the process. If we repeatedly go into a situation and it always ends with us struggling, panicking, and feeling like we've barely survived, then all we've done is teach our brain, yep, told you, that was just as bad as I thought it would be. It was a terrible idea. Let's not do it ever again. This then makes our next exposure twice as hard and creates the, well, that didn't work at all effect that I hear so often described by people who come to see me who have already tried and hated exposure therapy. After a while, doing their exposures became the thing they were most anxious about. They ended up creating higher levels of fear about doing them simply because they were bracing themselves for an entirely unpleasant and largely unhelpful experience that they were told they had to do or forever be stuck feeling anxious. Talk about pressure. No wonder many find that the process of exposure quickly becomes one of their major anxiety triggers. So if avoidance is a bad idea and now exposure is even worse, what's this better way that I've been alluding to? Well, here it comes now. Now hopefully, when it comes to why the approaches I've spoken about already might not help, you've noticed a theme. It's not about what we do, it's about what we learn from those experiences. Avoidance might backfire because we learn that we're right to fear our triggers. Confronting our fears might backfire because we learn that we will have an unpleasant experience. So what's the answer? The answer is to learn that there is nothing to fear. Learn that what you previously thought was threatening is in fact entirely benign. Understand that none of these anxiety sensations that seem to be so easily triggered can in any way harm, damage or hurt you, except that none of these thoughts, feelings or sensations are going anywhere or mean anything sinister that you need to be concerned about. So we can take time away from our triggers if we want, as long as we understand that when we return to action, we might expect to feel anxious about that process. It would kind of be weird if we didn't, wouldn't it? Or we can confront our triggers as long as we focus on the outcome rather than the experience. Yes, we'll feel anxious in that situation because, well, for all the reasons you already know about why you feel anxious in specific circumstances. But every time it ends with you getting the other side, calming down and being perfectly well and undamaged by the experience. The better way to deal with your perceived trigger situations is to no longer fear the thoughts or sensations being triggered. That's the end game here. Once we're okay with feeling anxious, then we don't pile anxiety on top of anxiety. We don't turn focus into fear. And ultimately, it all kind of calms down. So no matter what you decide to do, there will come a time when you'll want to engage with the old situation or activity that you feel caused high anxiety. But if we go into it, feel a bit anxious but get through it, and crucially, if we notice that we got through it and focus on the outcome rather than the discomfort, then we teach our mind something else entirely. Previously, you might have felt like you failed because you felt anxious. You might say, see, I knew it. As soon as I even approached the situation, anxiety struck. But always remember that simple truth. Feeling anxious is not some bad thing that happened. It's just the emotional response to a situation that felt important. The real thing that happened was you got through it. You did the thing. You returned to calm. And the more you let that be the story you tell yourself, the story of success, the more your brain learns that you're capable and safe. Then the next time, it doesn't brace itself for a threat. It anticipates a win. And every time you do that in the future, that feeling of dread reduces. Not because you endured suffering, but because you learned that there was never anything to fear. That's it for now. Let me know your thoughts on this one in the comments below. And if you found it helpful, make sure you like the video, subscribe to the channel, and check out the members area for hours of exclusive content. Thanks for watching. I'm Tim Box. Always remember, be kind to your mind, and I'll see you next time.